Bava Batra Daf Kuf Zayin Amud Aleph, Tradition and Logic, Rav Asi Mesapkele. We have a beautiful example of how Torah has been transmitted down to us, particularly during that critical period of the transition from the Babylonian system of the Talmud itself, of the Gemara itself, followed by the period of the Geonim. The Geonim were all heads of academies in Babylon, in Bavel. And then the Torah from there moves out to North Africa and to Europe. The person very heavily responsible for teaching the Babylonian system in North Africa is Rabeinu Gershom, and at the same time, the person who's very instrumental in teaching the Babylonian system to Europe is Rabeinu Gershom. And so you have these two giants, Rabeinu Gershom in North Africa, Rabeinu Gershom in Europe, teaching Torah, the Torah that was developed in Bavel, in the academies of Bavel. And from Rabeinu Gershom we get Rashi and the Tosfot school, and the whole European system is developed. The European system and the North African system ultimately merge in Spain, in the system of Sfarad, until the period of the expulsion of the Jews in the 15th century, when this blended North Africans, and North Africa's people like the Rif and the Rashbam, and you've got that whole influence, as we've often learned, and then the influence of the Baalei Tosfos that penetrate into Spain. People like the Rashbam and the Rashbam and the Ritvo are able to blend these two approaches. The blended Torah that comes from the European school of the Tosfos and the North African school of the Rif is then re-exported to Europe and Africa during the period of the expulsion, and continues to develop somewhat separately in North Africa and in Europe. And then in modern times gets blended again in Eretz Yisrael, where it all comes together. It's just very fascinating to look at the process of the evolution of Torah. But the period we're looking at now is that period bridging from the end of the Babylonian period, from after the time of the Geonim, at the end of the 10th century, to the early period of the Rishonim, the 13th and the 12th century. That becomes a very critical area. And our Gemara gives an interesting example of how that all works, because in our Gemara we have a machlokes Rav and Shmuel, a difference of opinion between Rav and Shmuel, in a case where two brothers share an inheritance from their father. Father leaves a field, they divide the field into two, each brother takes a piece. A debtor of a creditor of the father comes to claim money from the estate, and this field the security was mortgaged for the loan that the father had taken out during his lifetime. So the creditor takes one of the brother's fields. The value of the loan is half the value of the father's fixed assets. So he doesn't go and take half from each brother. He just comes to the one brother and he takes away the field which that brother is inherited. Does that brother have recourse to the other brother? Can he now go back and say, hey, not fair, I've landed up paying our father's debts and I've got no land? Or do we say, well, that's tough. You know, you've taken the land, we each took risk with the land, and I'm sorry for your hardship, but that's how it is. So on that there's a machlokes Rav and Shmuel. Rav says, Betelo machloket. Rav says, no, you've got to go back to the drawing board again. You've got to redivide the property after the creditor has taken away the property. Shmuel amar viter, and Shmuel says, tough luck. This is how it is. It's as if he bought it from his brother. It's as if he bought this field from his brother in a situation of shelo ba'achrayut, where there was no guarantee given with the sale, and in such a situation you take the risk yourself. And each of them took their own risks. That was the understanding. You take half, I take half, and we're both taking a chance. If our father had debts and this gets taken away from one of us, that might just be the case, and that's how it is. And we learned yesterday about how one can look at life as that there's a hashkocha when things happen beyond our control, to accept that's what the Rabeinu Gershom wanted, and that's how it would be. Rav Asi isn't sure what the halacha is. And the Gemara goes in, as it explained by Rashbam and the others, as to explaining what the reasoning is for these two perspectives. Why might it be that he has recourse? Why might it be that he doesn't have recourse? Rav Asi is not sure whether the ongoing relationship between the two brothers in the matter of the estate is one of heirs, and they still have claims on one another because they're both heirs and both are responsible for their father's debt, or are they like like people who bought from one another, and that's the end of the deal. Once the deal is sealed and you've taken delivery, you've got no more claims on the seller. And Rav Asi wasn't sure which one was which. Hilkach, therefore, and here the wording of the Gemara is a little ambiguous. Notel revia bekarka verevia b'maot. One way of translating this is, he takes a quarter in land and a quarter in cash, meaning a total of a half. So if the fields together were 100, they each got 50. His 50 got taken away. So he can come back to his brother to take half of what's left. And of that half of what's left, he takes half in cash and half in property. Another way of reading it is, notel revia bekarka urevia b'maot. He can take a total of a quarter of what his brother's got left. In other words, although if he's entitled, if he has recourse, he should be able to get half of what his brother's got less. If he doesn't have recourse, he should get nothing of what his brother's got left. And since Rav Asi is not sure, he gives him half of a half, which is a quarter. And that can be paid either in land or in cash. That's the second way of learning the Gemara. Rabeinu Gershom, who we mentioned just a few minutes ago, explains this decision of Rav Asi and says he learns it that he gets the full half. There's no question that he has recourse. That's not an issue in Rav Asi's mind. What Rav Asi is not sure about is, does the brother have the right to pay him cash, or can that brother insist that he wants half of the property, he wants the land? In the Gemara we see land is always valued more than cash. However much cash will increase in value, land will increase in value more. And there's always a preference for the land than the cash, unless the land's very unattractive land. And in this case, the brother holds the land, has to give half away to his brother. A quarter of it is in cash and a quarter of it is in property. That's how Rabeinu Gershom learns it. Fine. Now we go to Bava Kama, where we find the same passage. And in Bava Kama, we don't have the Rashbam, as you know, we have Rashi. And Rashi explains the Gemara not like Rabeinu Gershom. Rashi brings the explanation, Revia bekarka yachzil or Revia chelko, or karka or maot. He only gives back a quarter. He has no claim on the half. He can get a quarter of the property from his brother. And the brother can choose whether to pay in cash or to pay in property. And then Rashi says, so Rashi is explaining it differently from Rabeinu Gershom. So again, Rabeinu Gershom says he takes a full half of his brother's property, which is paid half in cash and half in land. Rashi in Bava Kama learns, no, he only gets a quarter, which can be paid either in land or in cash, but the total will only be 25% of the whole piece. He won't get half. So there's a big difference in the two ways of explaining it. But then Rashi in Bava Kama says, Lishna Achrina, there is another way of explaining it, which is unusual for Rashi. Rashi doesn't usually crowd us with all sorts of different ones. This shit is this, and this one says that, and this one. Rashi takes the way that navigates us through the sugya in the clearest way possible, and he gives us one approach. Occasionally he'll bring a second approach, like here. Lishna Achrina, there is another version, and here he quotes Rabeinu Gershom's approach. And then he just says, V'lashon rishon shamati, but I was taught the first way. Interesting thing that Rashi says. He doesn't go into which is right and which is better and which is more accurate. He just says, V'lashon rishon shamati. I'm authorized to teach you what I learned from my Rabbeim. I learned the first one from my Rabbeim. Okay, Rashi, if you learned the first one from your Rabeim, why are you even mentioning the other? That's not like you to mention everybody. Rashi sounds like a modern rabbi with a long source sheet of all sorts of different people who say different things and different shittas. And that's not Rashi. Rashi brings one view. He's teaching the Gemara, and he brings the Gemara according to the easiest way, the clearest way to understand the Gemara. Why are you bringing another view? Because it's Rabeinu Gershom. That this is not just any other view, this is Rabeinu Gershom. Why is that so important to Rashi? Because Rashi has three Rabbeim. Rashi learns from Rabbi Yaakov ben Yakar. Rashi learns from Rabbi Yitzchok bar Elazar Halevi. Rashi learns from another Rabbi Yitzchok ben Yehuda. Three Rabbeim, three teachers Rashi has. Those three teachers are all Talmudim of Rabeinu Gershom. So Rashi is one generation away from Rabeinu Gershom. So Rashi feels necessitated to tell you, but my Rabbeim's Rebbe don't learn it this way. But Kach Shamati, this is how they taught me. So those Rabbeim, at least one of them, maybe all of them, chose to abandon Rabeinu Gershom's way of learning the Gemara and opted for another way of learning the Gemara. Why would they have done so? Mystery. When you learn Bava Kama, that's a mystery. You see that Rabeinu Gershom has a perush. Rashi brings Rabeinu Gershom's perush and brings another perush and says, and I learned the first one, meaning my Rabbeim, who were Talmudim of Rabeinu Gershom, chose not to explain the Gemara Rabeinu Gershom's way. So for that you look at our Rashbam. Now remember, Rashbam is the link between Rashi and Tosfos. Rabeinu Tam really starts, the Rashbam's brother really starts the Tosfos school, but the Rashbam is the link between his grandfather Rashi and the Tosfos that his brothers get going and his nephews later on. The Rashbam brings the whole story, explains it very beautifully, and then you'll see on the second page of the source sheets down, 4 paragraphs down, Lashon acher piresh Rabeinu zekeni b'bava kama b'ferik rishon. My Rebbe, my Zayda, brought another perush, and he brings the Rabeinu Gershom. And he says, and Rashi says, learn the first way, don't learn the second way. V'chein hu, and that is correct, says the Rashbam. And the Rashbam continues to explain why the Rabbeim of Rashi chose not to explain like Rabeinu Gershom. And he says, because that's the style of the Gemara is when an Amora is not sure whether the halacha is like A or like B, he blends the two together, a bit of A and a bit of B, whereas according to Rabeinu Gershom, there's no blend. He goes into a difference, says, I'm not sure if it's A or B, so I'll come with C. It says the Rashbam, that's not the style of the Gemara. The style of the Gemara is if you're not sure if it's A or B, you blend A or B together. And the first parish where we say you don't get half, you get a quarter, is because according to one you get a half, according to the other you get another. So yachloiku, dividing, I'm not sure which you do, so you divide it. A half of a half is a quarter. That's what you would do if it's Moman Hamutal Besofik. If you're not sure whether the halacha is like Rav or the halacha is like Shmuel, you divide the difference. That's what we do. And says Rashbam, that's why my Rabbeim opted for this other perush in favor of their Rebbe's own perush, which is Rabeinu Gershom. And not to dismiss Rabeinu Gershom, our Tosfos goes back to Rashi. Our Tosfos goes back to Rabeinu Gershom and says he actually prefers Rabeinu Gershom's way. So it's not a simple fact, and we don't have time to go into that. All I want to show you is this development of halakha. Rashi's job is simply to say, I'll teach you what I was taught. I'm your Rebbe, I'm your Cheder teacher. I'm here to teach you how to learn the Gemara. Learn the Gemara the way I was taught the Gemara. Don't get more complicated than that. The Rashbam begins to compare styles, compare sugyas, begins to make preferences and explains the views of Rashi's Rabbeim. And then Tosfos goes much further during the whole Tosfos period of hyper-analyzing the Gemara using comparative sources across the Talmud all over Shas. And so we get the development of European during the medieval time of the European school of learning, developed by Tosfos and masterminded by Tosfos, and we see clearly the different styles. Rabeinu Gershom teaches it as he understood it from his Rabbeim. His Rabbeim question it and make modifications. Rashi goes according to the way he was taught, and the Rashbam explains the differences.